Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Nina. We're gonna mostly have this be a Q&A session because we want to make sure that you guys are getting your questions answered. So we're gonna really quickly just introduce ourselves, give our background, and give kind of our three primary family focuses when it comes to nutrition in our own households. By no means is our way the only way, the right way. If you don't do what we do, don't feel bad. That's totally okay. And we did create kind of a handout with some of our favorite resources. They're right here on the little black thing. I don't know what that is. So feel free to grab one. It has the books. It has our family focuses. And just also on the back is local resources if you feel like you do need to get a dietitian on board. You want to introduce yourself and then we'll just go down the line?
Sure. Hi. I'm Marissa. I'm Marissa Bolivar. I'm a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and I started out managing clinical nutrition in the hospital before I transitioned to home health, hospice, and palliative care. I worked in that setting for a number of years in addition to a number of oncology clinics, so oncology definitely became a specialty for me. And I eventually opened up a private practice where I helped people manage their cancers and also chronic gastrointestinal disorders, tummy trouble. And now I teach at Cal Poly. I teach nutrition and food science at Cal Poly. I'm juggling that actually with a doctorate program in clinical nutrition that will probably take me another 5 years or so. And are we introducing our families yet?
Yeah.
Okay. So at home, I have 4 kids. I have 2 young girls and 2 older boys. Charlotte is 5. Ella is 9. Rylan just turned 18 and Aiden is 20. I really had to think about that. So the 2 boys are actually from my husband's previous marriage. I met them when they were 4 and 6 years old, and suddenly this topic applied to me overnight because they are what I would describe as extremely picky eaters. Aiden only ate 4 foods, and Rylan copied everything that his brother did. So due to the nature of our blended family, I really had to acquire some creative solutions at that time. And the other aspect of our family that I wanted to touch on is that one of our younger girls does have some special needs surrounding food. She's a high sensory kid, and she has almost no interest in eating. So the tool set that I apply for her is very different from what approach I would ever take with our other kids. And the reason that I mention that is if you have a child like this, whether it's a child on the spectrum or with ADHD, an anxiety disorder, or any other number of issues that could really be benefited by extra support, I highly encourage you to consult a pediatric dietitian because it can be really helpful to gain some expertise from somebody outside of your bubble that can give you a good working tool set and work with you on those creative solutions.
As I mentioned, I'm Andy Nina. I've been a dietitian for about 10 years now. I, just like these two, started out in the hospital with clinical nutrition. I really loved the ICU. That was where I felt like I thrived and loved it. Over the course of my career, I ended up going more into the management side of clinical and nutrition in general. And then now I work 100% remote, supporting hospitals all across the U.S. with their nutrition and dietetics. I have 2 little girls at home, 6 and 5, and some of the big things for me just with home for my family is I didn't want to create a picky eater. That was one of my biggest focuses when my kids were really little, and so I had set a goal for myself and for the kids to introduce 100 foods before they were 1 year old to really promote that food exposure. It can take anywhere from 8 to 30 times a child is introduced to a food to accept it. And so I had to get really comfortable with wasting food, which kind of broke my heart in a lot of ways. But it was also really important to me to not develop that picky eater in my own kids. Kind of one of my other focuses, as you can see here, is food is not a reward in our household. I do not use food as a tool to get them to obey. I don't use it as a reward if they do something good, if they achieve something. That I just don't want to create food to have that psychological aspect of that's your reward. again, I know not every household does that. That's just something that was big for me. And then the last thing that I really focus on is quality of ingredients in our home. I'm really big on what is in our food. I did a deep dive quite a few years ago on the food supply in the US, and it is not the greatest. We don't have a lot of regulations around it, and so that is something that is really important to me. And just all the behavioral effects that artificial food dyes can have on our children is pretty profound. So hot tip on that, if you do ever want to buy like something sweet treats or candy, go to Trader Joe's. They don't put any artificial food dyes in any of their candy. So that's where I get all my sweet treats.
Same. My name is Tiffany Gonzalez. I am a registered dietitian. I've been a dietitian for 12 years now. I have always worked in the hospital setting. I worked with adults for a long time. In the past few years, I have specialized in NICU nutrition, so I am working with the littlest babies in there, the youngest babies, and making sure that they are getting the most premium nutrition that they can get to start their lives off well. I also work with the pediatric population at Sierra Vista as well. I am married to Joe. We've been married for 10 years, and we have 2 kids. Ellie is 7, and Noah is turning 5 next week. So with my own family, my focus with food has kind of always been about minimizing any battles around food. I want our family table to be a place of connection, a place of getting to know each other better, a place of laughing and making memories, and not a place where we are having battles all the time, where I'm putting pressure on kids about food or anything like that. That's kind of my primary focus when it comes to our family meals. My husband works a non-traditional job, so he, as far as family meals go, he's not always able to be part of our dinner every night or breakfast every morning or something like that because he has long shift hours. So I do my very best as the person who is the most present with my kids at the meals to kind of present them with well-rounded meals, knowing that they have plenty of good options ahead of them, in front of them, and not putting the pressure on them that they need to eat so much of this or try this every single time. I've done the work ahead of time. I've planned the meals. I've done the shopping. I've prepared the food. I've involved my kids in those aspects in various ways, which we can talk about a little bit more if you guys have questions about how to do that. And then once we get to the table, the food is there. And now we're talking about our days, and we're telling stories, and we're learning about each other, and we're not necessarily focusing on, how many pieces of carrots did you eat with your meal tonight, that sort of thing. So for me, it's really, really important that my meal table with my family is not a battleground. I also am really big on treating food as something that is morally neutral. Different foods are not good. They are not bad. We don't need to assign morality to different types of food. We live in 2025 in the United States of America. We have a lot of different types of foods available to us, and we don't need to, we have a lot of information available to us as well. I don't put a lot of pressure on myself to strive for perfectionism with all the foods that are available to me. Because of our knowledge as dietitians, we definitely know more than the general population about what are maybe the best food choices that we can make. I don't put a lot of pressure on myself about that. I am trying to work within what are my resources that I have at the time. Maybe how much time do I have to make a meal for my family or plan a meal for my family or shop for a meal for my family? How much mental capacity do I have on any given day, to actually feed my family? How much money do I have available in my budget to feed my family that week? So I know that we're all working with different amounts of resources, and we're just gonna do the best that we can with the resources that we have in that time. And I just want to give moms and parents permission to not put so much pressure on themselves about it. We are feeding our families. Our families are eating at least 3 times a day in most cases, right? So as long as throughout the course of a week, we're providing a well-rounded option of foods to our kids and our families, the odds are it kind of all evens out in the end. So I feel like it's easy for moms and parents to kind of focus on one particular meal, like she barely ate 2 bites of this. But if you look at the course of a week, we've got a pretty good trend going throughout the week. So that's kind of a big focus for me. And yeah, and I would also echo, of course, what both of these women are saying. And I also, as far as the food is morally neutral, I don't like using food as a reward or a bribe or taking something away as a punishment as far as food goes. I try to just kind of keep it as we are, as a family, are enjoying this and kind of focus more on the pleasure and the connection of food as opposed to like, you need to eat this to be a healthy person. There's a lot of ways to be a healthy person. So food is one part of that. Can I circle back? Go for it.
So a few of the priorities that we focus on is probably first and foremost the importance of family meals. This task has been really far from easy at times. My husband is a surgeon, and he regularly takes ER call, and that doesn't often allow for a 5 o'clock dinner. So often I do a late afternoon snack. I keep it really light, and that enables us to sit down to the table later on in the day, sometimes at 7 or 7:30, when probably many of your kids are already in bed. But that togetherness is really paramount for us, and I think that it really helps to aid in food acceptance and foster a healthy family and also just wholesome eating patterns, right? The caveat to that is you have to find some ways of satisfying hungry tummies without spoiling anyone's appetite for dinner, because your kid's appetite is probably the most important ingredient in the meal. I think that, if they're sitting down hungry with good company, they're going to be a lot more likely to try new foods and hopefully accept them, right? The other challenge in that is making one meal for the whole family. And when the boys were young, that was definitely a challenge. I did, in fact, make one meal for the whole family, but I did include 2 or 3 safe foods at the table for them so that no one was leaving the table hungry. Now that they're older and over 18, moved out, I have a very different approach. If you're curious about that, you can ask me anytime. Another priority in our family is connecting the function of food back to our well-being, just like Tiffany was saying. Fun foods have a really important place in our diet. Food's so much more than nutrition. It's how we socialize and connect and celebrate with each other. That's really profound. That being said, filling up on a bunch of non-nutritive foods like candy and highly processed convenient foods makes our tummy feel yucky and it makes our bodies feel tired. So I think you can really encourage your children to have a positive relationship with food while also empowering them to use it as a tool to understand the impact of how that it makes them feel in everyday life, right? Thirdly would be planning. Wholesome, balanced meals just don't happen by chance, sadly. I wish they did. I can't emphasize that enough. I think if you don't have a plan for dinner, let alone for breakfast and lunch, you're probably gonna have to wing it. And if you wing it, you're probably piecemealing a food experience together for your family, and that rarely results in a healthy, balanced, or probably even more importantly, satisfying option for everybody. So I'm a big believer in making a plan and correlating that plan with our schedule. I am planning the most simple and easy meals for our busiest nights of the week that really can help us offset food waste and also set us up for success so that we're not often falling back on a non-nutritious or unsatisfying meal or eating out, right? Which is another great easy alternative. And then certainly not last, but the last priority that I'm gonna mention in the space of our time is implementing that division of responsibility that both of you alluded to. And that is, as a parent, we decide what is provided, when and where it's provided, and the kids decide whether they eat it and how much they eat. That approach did not work nearly as well with the boys because they didn't have many exposures that were new outside of our home. But I think it does help food be neutral, and it takes the pressure off of you as a parent, right? one of the girls who has no appetite and the other one who does not innately like vegetables at all, I think also has showed me that some kids do need a little more encouragement than others, and that's where I want to introduce to you another tool. So the division of responsibility we mentioned is Ellen Satter, Secrets of Feeding a Healthy Family, and this is the other one, French Kids Eat Everything. It's pretty much the opposite. And it also was very helpful for me. It's about a mom actually who relocates her family, including her 2 picky eating daughters, to France. And she has to teach them how to eat as the French do in order to assimilate to their food culture. So our society is not set up like that at all. But it does help. It helped me understand how our food preferences are aligned and some tools that we can use as parents to help train them, right, and mentor them. So it also allows you, I think, all this material to kind of extrapolate tools that work well for your family, extrapolated tools from this book, as well as from Ellen Satter, and gave me a great bookend to stack my approach. It also propelled me to inspire more ownership in the meal experience with our kids. So I have them participate in menu planning always. I have them each choose a meal every night of the week. And then when time allows, I encourage them to help me grocery shopping. They like to pick the things off the shelf and put it in the cart, right? And pick out a produce item or something like that, as well as cooking when the time allows. Obviously, time doesn't always allow for that as busy moms, right? So, ultimately, I think that your family is constantly evolving and your food habits can as well. I'm far from perfect, and your kids are really adaptable. So ultimately, I think the name of the game in feeding your family is just extrapolating the tools that work for you to help you set up your goals.
And now we're going to open it up for some questions because everybody's family is different, and I want to hear your scenarios. What have you run into with your kids, and how can we provide some guidance?
I'm having issues with breakfast because when he was young, I introduced like lunch stuff. Like I was like with you, like introduced him food when he was hungry, but he threw up when he drank milk and eggs. I didn't like eggs, so in the morning I can't eat eggs in the morning. Like it makes me nauseous. So breakfast food is like my issue. Like what recommendations do you have for like healthy breakfast food that's not because right now he's eating cereal and I hear like not really good things about cereal, like that it reduces testosterone, like issues with that. So 2 questions just about cereal. What's the take on that? And if I should continue giving him that, and just quick options for like breakfast.
So the question was, if you couldn't hear, she's struggling with breakfast with her kids, and then also just on the quality of nutrition related to cereal. Do you want me to? Okay. So I don't like breakfast food either, to be honest. I never have. It's probably my least favorite meal of every single day. So you might have a child who is like that. What are considered like breakfast foods or not breakfast foods is very societal. If you want to give them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at breakfast, go for it. Put something on there that they're going to do it. Still put eggs or something else on the side as like an introduction. Just do a very small amount. And maybe the more that your child is introduced to those foods, they'll start accepting them. But don't put the pressure on them to eat it. Again, kind of going back to that division of responsibility, the child really determines if they're going to eat it and how much of it, if they are.
Yeah, I would echo that. Breakfast foods are very cultural. And my son for breakfast this morning had chicken noodle soup because it's his favorite, and we had it last night, and he wanted that this morning. So it does not have to be breakfast food at breakfast time. That's okay. And as far as introducing the eggs, hard-boiled eggs, scrambled eggs, fried eggs, trying in a variety of cooking methods for them can sometimes he might find one way that he likes it more than others, and that can be another way to expose him to it. How old is your son?
He's going to be 9.
Going to be 9. Yeah, he's at a great age to help with maybe preparing eggs if he's interested in, trying them or helping with cracking the eggs, cooking the eggs, serving the eggs. So he's at a great age to kind of be working with foods that you're wanting to expose him to more. That's always a really helpful thing. Even if he doesn't taste it, just being part of the process is an exposure. Making it a positive experience with that food is an exposure. And it can take, like Andy said, well over 20 tries for a kid to be exposed to a food, whether they're even just working with it in the kitchen, looking at it, having it on their plate, smelling it, maybe taking a taste before they even will accept it. Not even necessarily like it, but accept it as this is a valid food option.
Yeah. Well, just going back to eggs, I think that I would encourage you also to expose your kids to foods that you enjoy, because ultimately it would be a meal experience that's shared around the table. So if you don't like eggs for breakfast, I wouldn't feel tied to that. There's no reason he needs to eat eggs for breakfast. So maybe some of the foods that you've liked in the past for breakfast might be a good alternative to that. As for cereal, that industry is just littered with all kinds of things. But some cereals are really nutritious, and I've never read any evidence that it can interfere with hormone levels or anything negative, especially if you're choosing a whole grain option, something that has fiber in the perfect world.
Well,
Really
when I'm
nice.
looking at cereal, I'm looking at the amount of fiber, and if there's maybe some protein provided as well.
I like Magic Spoon. It's high protein and there's no added sugar.
I really like the granola from Gather. It has flaxseed in it and not like a ton of sugar. My 5-year-old loves that cereal.
Yeah. And I'm fine with things like shredded wheat, and you can always put some honey or little sprinkles on there or something to make it more exciting. Fruit on it. That's great. Something as basic as Cheerios is going to be fine too, but not as filling.
Maybe you can start with things that he does like, right? And kind of go from there. My daughter had edamame this morning for breakfast. Frozen, you guys. She wanted frozen edamame. It's really strange.
Just feed them.
Just feed them.
Any
So is my
other-
goal.
Any other questions? We have just a few minutes left. They wouldn't stop and be excited about a meal or anything. Nobody has to be a foodie. That's okay. It's kind of would be a bummer for me as a mom. But nobody has to be a foodie. You just keep providing well-rounded meals and snacks at the times that you choose, at the places that you choose. Let them eat. They get to choose if they eat and how much they eat.
And they will truly eat if they're hungry. So you don't have to worry so much about the quantity of food. They will make sure that their body is getting what it needs. It's a societal training that we do of portion size, and they need to have this month or this much. They don't. Think of yourself. You don't have the same amount of food every single day. There's days that you're hungrier than others. Kids are the same.
My daughter is 9 years old, and she's been a picky eater since she was little. And it's so hard because I put her the food in the food. She starts to get nauseous. She doesn't want to eat no meat, no milk at all, just orange juice or water, cold water, macaroni cheese, grilled cheese, all of that thing.
Cheese is life in kids, yeah.
It's really hard to see, or I just tell her, what do you want? Because if I make you something, you won't eat it. It's so hard for me to find something, She's really picky.
Repeat the question. So she's asking, your daughter's is 9? 9 years old, and she's very, very picky and prefers generally foods that include cheese, mac and cheese, grilled cheese, water, orange juice. Won't drink milk or anything like that. And this comes back to the practice of exposure. Keep including her in things like the meal planning process. Say, okay, maybe we are going to have mac and cheese for this meal for lunch. We're going to have a vegetable or fruit with it as well. Would you rather have broccoli or carrots with it? Would you rather have peaches or a cutie with it? And give her a little bit of autonomy over that side of it so that she knows, I was part of this, and maybe that's more exciting. Maybe she picks something when you're at the grocery store. She grabs something and is part of the purchasing of it. She's part of the planning. She's part of the buying. Then when you're in the kitchen, she can be part of the preparing. She can, help with slicing things up, putting it on the plate. Whether or not she eats it is not a thing that I want you to be putting pressure on her about, okay? It is very, very important to keep pressure away from your meal table. She's going to eat or she's not going to eat, but having it there next to the food is an exposure. Like I said, just keep including her about it in the process and keeping it as positive as we can, because the more that she associates these different types of foods with positive experiences with you is kind of that connection point that I was talking about. Like she doesn't need to try everything all at once. It can be a long process with these picky eaters. It's a long game that you're in right now, but it is something that you want to just keep repeating exposures, keeping giving her opportunities to see some other options, and as much as you can, just keep the pressure off. She is the one who's deciding if she eats and how much she eats. Any other insights on that? Nope.
So, at least two of you were talking about not wanting to associate food with like morality or I forget the word you used, but what do you do as far as like dessert? So, if your child decides not to eat, do you have like a, I mean, I don't know, how do you deal with that?
So the question was around desserts, and if your child chooses not to eat the rest of the meal, do you still offer dessert? What do you do around that? Who wants to take this?
I'll start, and we can all give our little insights. As far as that's kind of depends on how your family wants to operate in the realm of dessert. So some families choose to have dessert served at the same time as the meal, and that way it's just part of the meal. They eat what they eat. Sometimes you'll find with some kids, they're so excited about eating the dessert, they get going on the dessert, and next thing you know, they're eating some of their plate too. So for some families, that works well. For other families, if you're doing dessert as an after the meal situation, which it kind of sounds like what you were saying, what I would recommend is that, again, keep the pressure off of the meal. This is the meal. This is what we're having. The child chooses if they're going to eat it, when they're going to eat it. If your family, as part of the family meal time tradition, is having dessert after the meal, then everybody is served that, and the child chooses if they'll eat it and when they'll eat it, or how much they'll eat. So keep it in line with what the rest of your family is doing. If it's not offered all at once, but everybody is offered a dessert at the end, then it's not, I would not use it as a punishment of you didn't eat that, so you're not gonna get the dessert that everybody else is having. We're still having dessert as a family. We can still connect as a family over dessert, and that's still okay. If that's not working, you feel like your child is not eating anything because they're just saving it up for dessert, maybe it might be a good idea for your family to try having dessert served at the same time as the meal to kind of introduce it in a different way and make it less on a pedestal, So it might be an option.
I love to give my kids dessert after breakfast. I'm not a big dessert person. My husband doesn't really have a sweet tooth, so that's not really a part of our dinner scope in our house. But I love giving it to my kids if they did want something. And again, not tying morality to it. It's not a bad food. Tying the functionality. Anytime we talk about, something that's sweeter, I always say, this is going to give you a really big burst of energy to go play, and then you're going to get tired later. Tying in that function, not calling it good or bad. So I actually really like to give it to my kids earlier in the day if that's something that they're asking for, just because then I know they're going to kind of burn off that energy and it doesn't necessarily ruin our dinner table. But kind of going back to it, if you do decide if you're gonna pull the dessert away, it's pulled from everyone. Again, you're controlling what is served. So if you feel like dessert needs to be off the table, it's off the table for everyone, not just for that one child.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. That being said, with Halloween candy, Easter candy, Christmas candy, there's always a Valentine's Day, there's always a season for candy. That's an afternoon thing at best. It's never after the dinner meal, because do you really want kids on candy after dinner when you're trying to get ready for bed? So dessert has been a trap that we have fallen into. I'm sad to say that we used it as a bribe with the boys because, frankly, I needed them to eat the calories. I was worried they wouldn't get enough calories. But I think it's okay to recognize that, oops, that's something that I need to change, and then wean them off of it. Probably having it as a nightly experience is a habit that could be addressed, right? So.
She's wondering what are the best resources for finding nutritional information on food, and what are we generally looking at when we look at nutritional information on food. So I'll share for myself, when I'm looking at nutrition labels, for me, the priorities are generally fiber and protein. I'm making sure, because those are nutrients that are going to help us feel full. They're going to be more satisfying. I'll also take fat content into consideration as an indicator of how full it will help me feel. Like as a matter of like, is this going to be a satisfying thing that I'm eating? So, whether I'm looking at pasta, or we were talking about cereal last time, or whatever, generally I'm looking at, if I'm comparing, should I buy this one or that one, I'll tend to go for the one that has maybe more fiber or more protein, depending on what else I've got going on in the meal. And then as far as places to look for that, I generally just look at nutrition labels, but any restaurant that's a chain restaurant has to have the nutrition information on their website or on their menu. And what other apps? I mean, MyFitnessPal, and is Calorie King still an app? I don't remember.
The only thing I would add for that, if I'm looking at a label, is a few years ago, added sugar was a requirement on nutrition labels. So I really like to look at that. Like, there's foods that naturally have sugar in it, dried fruit, things like that. That's great. And, that's glucose. Our brain thrives off glucose. We want that. But I really try to eliminate foods that have additional sugar added in, because it's usually just not necessary. And then I always look for the food dyes.
Yeah, I think reading the ingredients label is also helpful in that. If there is a whole bunch of items added that you cannot pronounce and you don't recognize as food, it's probably not real food. So just sticking to really simple ingredients lists, if they all look like normal foods that are probably wholesome, right? Yeah. Then it's probably not a bad option, even if it does have fat and sugar. I don't know.
What about when you offer food and they eat as much as they want, and then it's bedtime and I'm starving?
We will be eating again and at breakfast time when you wake up in the morning.
And I even give a last call.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, she's.
But Mom, you told me to trust my body and what my body needs, and my body really needs food. I say no, but I do feel bad for that. She's like,
Of course.
going to bed in my belly.
What time do you offer dinner typically?
My husband also has a crazy job, so we try to eat together. So sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 8, and they go to bed at like 8:30. So they usually eat by 7. And at 7:30, I say last call, and I will give them their healthy, safe options. If they didn't love dinner, like they can have a spoonful of peanut butter. I don't know if that's good or bad. But
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Protein. I think there's a lot of value in offering a bedtime snack if you think that separation from the meal is appropriate, because you also don't want them to skip dinner because they know snack's coming 30 minutes later, if they don't like what the option is for dinner, right? But I offer a bedtime snack because I feel like my girls really need the calories. Like, they need the energy if they're hungry for it. And then after last call, the kitchen's closed, and don't worry, I'll offer you a great breakfast in the morning. They'll get used to it.
Yeah, definitely the timing matters. I kind of have a cutoff for myself. Generally, my kids are eating dinner within 2 hours before they're going to bed. So at that point, I don't offer any bedtime snacks. They had plenty of time sitting at the table to to work with the food in front of them. But if it's more than 2.5 hours since dinner time before they're going to bed, and somebody says they're hungry, then I will offer a snack. But my kids, it's not like a standing situation in my house because we generally have, less than 2 hours between dinner and bed. So, so if they are saying they're hungry and they only ate within the last 2 hours, they had a good dinner in front of them, then that's when I'm saying, we'll be eating again in the morning. When we wake up, you'll have a good filling breakfast then. And I do, you mentioned this too about not filling up on snacks. I do like to remind myself that feeling hungry is not necessarily a bad thing. It's part of our physiological nature as humans to have times of hunger and times of fullness. And so if we are feeling hungry, I like to remind them we will enjoy our next meal so much because it's so much better when we're hungry.
I have another question if no one else.
Yeah.
I heard you guys say something when I walked in with the last group about pressuring food. Is it ineffective to say, I would like you to have one bite of this if it's something they say they don't like? They will.
Yeah. She's wondering about, is it ineffective to tell your child, I would like you to have one bite of this food? That, I think, can be a family rule that you establish. Different families handle that in different ways. If your family rule is to take a no thank you bite, you cannot say, no, I don't like it, I won't eat it, without taking one bite. That can be your family rule, and that needs to be discussed away from the table as like, this is how we operate in our family. Because that is I do think that is part of manners. Part of being at the table with our kids is teaching manners. So if you're worried about your child being in somebody else's home and being offered something and they're just saying, ew, yucky, I don't like that, and you would like them to have the manners of trying it before they say no thank you instead, then that can be something that you require of your kids. And that's, I think, a conversation that can be had away from the table before they're in the situation of panicking because, oh my gosh, now I have to take one bite of this food I don't think I like. Then they can understand, but this is the expectation when I sit down at the table, I try it, I say no thank you. And they know that there's no pressure other than just taking the one bite. Other families don't have that pressure on their, or that rule, I guess, with their family, and they just require their kids to just have it there and just kind of leave it and take the pressure off. There's kind of a family dynamic.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and I totally agree with you, is I just want to phrase it as a no thank you bite because you're kind of programming them to think, no, I don't like this, but thanks, right? Before they even try it. So I would just deliver it in a way that they could like it and then just be neutral about your reaction after they try it. Hey, what'd you think of that?
Yeah.
I didn't like it. Oh, okay.
I do like to remind kids that our taste buds are always changing. So just because you didn't like it last time, we try it again and see if we like it this time. And our words as moms, we know this just in general with behavior with our kids, but especially with food, our words are so powerful with how we talk about food, how we describe food. So being really conscientious, especially if there's a food that you don't like, and, describing it, maybe it's a really bright red pepper, not saying I hate peppers, just kind of making it neutral in that exposure too.
Yeah, and there's a difference between encouraging them, like, you can say something along the lines of, have you tried it? Or what if I try it with you? Or so, like, you can provide it in an encouraging way where they're not feeling forced, but also know when to let it go. Something I mentioned in the last one is I had to get really comfortable with wasting food. Your kids are not going to eat everything, and you need, as the parent, to be able to just accept that. Start with really small portions, especially if it's a brand new food or something that they notoriously have not eaten. Start with a really, really small portion so that waste isn't as insurmountable, but get comfortable with wasting food and be okay with it. It can take up to 30 times for a kid to be exposed to a food to even be willing to try it. So you're not doing yourself, like my oldest despises rice. And to me, it's the weirdest thing because it's like the most bland food ever, but she does not eat rice. But every single time rice is being served, it's on her plate. It's a very small amount. She, 99% of the time, is not touching it, but I'm continuing to add that exposure. Now she's to the point where she'll try like a bite and she's like, in our house, kind of going back to the manners, but now, I've now trained my kids to say it's not my favorite because I think that's a little less rude than saying I don't like it. And I am worried about what they say when they go to other people's houses. But that's just something quirky.
I think I offered the boys artichoke 53 times. We kept a record because it's hilarious. And now it's their favorite vegetable. So it took dozens and dozens of times before they would take a bite. It was a really long game. But I love artichoke. So that leftover was great for me. And that's where I would go back to the thing about the eggs that had surfaced in the last discussion. If you're offering them foods that you really enjoy, then it doesn't have to be food waste, right? Because you'll enjoy it too when they won't.
And on the
Or for
flip side, don't not expose your child to a food because you don't like it. So, 100 foods before one, there's definitely foods that I do not enjoy and still don't enjoy to this day. I really don't like tomatoes. My kids love tomatoes and it's always on their plates. So just because you don't like something, buy it at the grocery store. Maybe your taste buds have changed from when, you were 15, 20 years younger. So, that's kind of our parting advice, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming in today. My name is Rayanne, for those of you who don't know me. I've been part of Mom to Mom for 9 years, and I love this ministry. I love being here. I love being a part of it. And today I've been asked to share about marriage. And I realize that this is not an easy topic for everybody. I know that our marriages are all in different seasons. Some may be in a season of summer, some may be in a season of winter. And we've all entered marriage in different spaces. Some of us as best friends, some not. Some of us may be on our second marriage. Maybe you started your marriage off with blended families. But wherever you are, I just hope I can be an encouragement to you. I know that some of you might actually feel like your marriage is beyond the help of a few practical tips. And if that's the case, then I would encourage you to talk to someone. See Carrie. She would be glad to point you towards someone who can help. Our church has access to some great resources. So please just don't go through your hard season alone. When I was asked to speak to marriages, I was like, me? Because I do think marriage is a very important topic that we should speak to, but I just didn't think that my voice should be the one doing the talking. I'm not a marriage expert at all, and I don't feel qualified to be up here, but I do have a lot of thoughts that swirl in my head, and I will try to get them out. I'm not a storyteller or an entertainer, but Shane and I have been married for 21 years and counting, and we talk about marriage a lot. And our desire is to keep from having a marriage of survival and to have one that's thriving instead. And that would be our desire for all of you. And we've read several marriage books, attended a marriage class. We've gone to 2 Weekend to Remembers. And I highly recommend attending Weekend to Remember. It's put on by Family Life. And I would recommend it for any marriage in any season. It's amazing. So we've learned a lot through all these things, and that's kind of what I'm going to be sharing from is what we've learned. And since I'm speaking to women, then I want to speak to our roles as wives and moms as well. The wife and mom of the house has a lot of power over the overall harmony of the household and the mood, and that's a little bit scary to me, but I can see that a lot in my own personal experience. For me as a wife, I know I need to have my priorities in order. I believe God should come first, supporting and respecting my husband second, followed by training and teaching my children. And then all other areas of life, including like jobs and volunteering, social life, sports, should be ordered around those top 3. No. Am I good at consistently keeping that order? No, I am not. But when I do put the effort and work into it, I see and feel the difference. So God first. Be intentional with praying and reading your Bible, journaling, whatever it is that brings you closer to God. Sometimes it's a walk in nature. Sometimes it's with friends. Sometimes it's just your alone time with your Bible. Sometimes it's in Bible study. Personally, for me, going to Bible study has been so good for my spiritual life. It keeps me consistently in the Word. It has grown my knowledge of God, and it has really stretched my prayer life. And when I'm aligning myself with God's word, respecting and supporting my husband comes much easier. Being in a negative and distant headspace has made that harder. But honestly, when we show support to our spouse, we are actually empowering him to be the man that God called him to be. And how could I not want that, right? And when those two priorities are running smoothly, I find I have more energy and feel more kindness towards my kids. And on top of that, by putting God and my husband first, I'm giving my kids a gift. It's not a perfect one, but it is a gift. When we were first married, it was hard. Shane and I both avoid conflict, and I'm a non-communicating, selfish, people pleaser kind of person. And I also got married as a kid, so I was 18, and Shane had to watch me grow up. But for the hard things of getting married so young, I would not trade it, because I would not be the woman I am today had I not married Shane. He has just been the best at being patient with me and supporting me and really encouraging me into growing into who God wants me to be. And I'm just really grateful for that. While we were in our early stages of marriage, we were given a book that had this poem in it. It was a poem that gave us a vision for our marriage, and moving forward, we have always kept this vision in mind. It's called The Wall, and I'm going to read that to you guys. Their wedding picture marked them from the table, these two whose minds no longer touched each other. They lived with such a heavy barricade between them that neither battering ram of words nor artilleries of touch could break it down. Somewhere between the oldest child's first tooth and the youngest daughter's graduation, they lost each other. Throughout the years, each slowly unraveled that tangled ball of string called self. And as they tugged at stubborn knots, each hid his searching from the other. Sometimes she cried at night and begged the whispering darkness to tell her who she was. He lay beside her, snoring like a hibernating bear, unaware of her winter. Once, after they had made love, he wanted to tell her how afraid he was of dying, but fearing to show his naked soul, he spoke instead about the beauty of her breast. She took a course in modern art, trying to find herself in colors splashed upon a canvas, complaining to other women about men who are insensitive. He climbed into a tomb called the office, wrapped his mind in a shroud of paper figures, and buried himself in customers. Slowly, the wall between them rose, cemented by the mortar of indifference. One day, reaching out to touch each other, they found a barrier they could not penetrate, and recoiling from the coldness of the stone, each retreated from the stranger on the other side. For when love dies, it is not in a moment of angry battle, nor when fiery bodies lose their heat. It lies panting, exhausted, expiring at the bottom of a wall it could not scale. And that poem is really sad, but it gave us a vision for our marriage. We want to be friends who enjoy each other and know each other long after raising kids. We have had hills and valleys. There's been times when living in the tomb of the office has definitely impacted us. There's also been times when I put too much time outside our home, socializing. I was not putting the time into our marriage. I've been guilty of participating in conversations that didn't build my husband up. And then having kids brought its own challenges as well. We even had a season where we were so focused on our extended family and our church group that we felt like we barely had a marriage. We were stretched so thin individually that we barely had any gas in the tank for each other. And through it all, we learned to talk about what we wanted and to assess how we were doing and change what we needed to change. And changing is hard, and conversations are hard, and they can bring tears and make you feel shame. But there is no shame in acknowledging when times are hard and that you do need to make changes. And needing to make changes does not mean you're a failure. I had to really work at not taking things personally, because there's always room to improve, and I should want that, right? So I would suggest talking to your spouse about what you want and what they want and what your vision would be for your marriage. And even if you don't do a long-term vision like we have, but more like a 5 or 10-year plan, it will give you a goal to work towards and a measuring stick to see how you're doing. So what is marriage anyway? God created marriage between man and woman, and in the book of Matthew, we're told to leave father and mother and become one. Our marriages are either moving toward oneness or drifting toward isolation. So, oneness in marriage is a way that we can reflect the character and unity of God to the world around us. And I think it's safe to say that we all want that marriage of oneness. However, drifting toward isolation is a lot easier because that's what comes naturally. Oneness takes intentional work, but in the long run, it's the way that will bring us joy and fulfillment in marriage. In order to move toward oneness, we have to recognize what the threats are to our marriage. Threats will look different in each marriage, but will come from similar places. Think of things like withdrawing into yourself, or the differences we bring into marriage, including our families and traditions. A huge threat for all of us is our culture's pattern. We live in a society that encourages us to be selfish. Only it uses pretty words like self-love and, freedom to disguise it. So think about the choices that you make each day and how they might be impacting you as a person. Are you making choices to do things for yourself? Are the choices you make and the people you're choosing to surround yourself encouraging you to live for yourself or for other people? There isn't anything wrong with doing something for yourself, but it's what's the main pattern of your life, the daily pattern. Getting your nails done or buying a new outfit for yourself is not going to mean you're headed towards isolation, but it can if that's your daily pattern. When we got married, from the outside, it looked like Shane and I were coming from very similar homes and backgrounds. We grew up in the same church association, in homes with a mom, dad, siblings. The Bible and Christianity were the foundations of our homes. However, after we got married, we realized that there were a lot of differences between our homes, and we had both made assumptions about the roles that we each play and what our home would look like. This was another area where we had to stop and talk and learn how to communicate what we did and didn't want our marriage to be. I never would have dreamed that our family upbringings would actually be a threat to the harmony of our home. Shane and I wanted to be a marriage of equals and to be a team. Even if you had good examples to follow, it's okay if you do something different. Your marriage is your own. And so you have to find what works for you. And that's where having that vision for our marriage has really been helpful. Another thing that was helpful to us was the idea of a love bank. So we learned about this early in our marriage, and we still talk about it to this day. Basically, we all have love banks, and everyone we come in contact with has an account. Positive encounters make deposits, and negative interactions will make withdrawals. So it's fairly self-explanatory. And this means that our account and our spouse's bank is very important, and theirs and ours as well. Before you decide to cancel date night because your friend invited you to a concert, think about how many withdrawals you've made lately and how many deposits, Is there enough there for this transaction to not really be noticed? Or have you made 4 withdrawals since your last deposit? It's just been another helpful tool that we have in our marriage toolbox. Also, having someone in your corner that's been through life, more life than you and is ahead of you, is amazing. I have an aunt who has been very open about her own marriage journey and is really quick to encourage me and my sisters in our own marriages. And I know I can go to her anytime. I also can count on her to point me to God and to encourage me to put the work in to my marriage. So I just hope you can find someone like that if you don't have someone special in your life. Okay, I've mentioned communication a few times. Obviously, this is one of the hardest things, but it's so key to the success of any relationship, but especially marriage. They say expectations are just prepackaged resentments, but I would add that it's uncommunicated expectations. Because I can talk with the best of them, but when it comes to actually communicating, I'm not so great. I definitely have had to work at it. It's not easy to share real feelings and expectations. It's also easy to assume that our spouse knows what we're thinking about them, knows what we want, knows how we feel about them. And this also leads into speaking words of life. Shane and I have talked a lot about that lately, speaking words of life into the younger generation. But I think it's equally important for us to speak words of life into our husbands. I think it's easy to fall into thinking that they're men, so they're strong and they're confident. But they have feelings too, they have needs too. And they're more vulnerable than we realize, and a spoken word of life can go a long way. Let them know you're proud to be their wife. Praise them when they accomplish even small things. Thank them for providing. Just a small word of affirmation will go a long way in the love bank. Also, choose to think the best of each other. This is really important. Our thoughts are always with us, and they impact our actions more than we realize. Shane has openly admitted that he is like an 80% kind of project guy, and I am not. I'm like, get it done. Shane knew that we were different in this way, but he had no idea how it might be a threat to our marriage. There have been many times when I've let unfinished projects around our place just like cloud my mind, and like I just can't stop thinking about it. And then Shane comes home from work and I'm annoyed with him. And this is how walls are like built up, you know? And I knew, of course, that the real problem was me and my choice to dwell on those things. But it really hit home when my kids started giving Shane a bad time and listing off all these unfinished projects. And I was like, oops, I created that. So I apologize. And I really purposed in my heart to start working on not thinking about those negative things. I mean, did any of the unfinished projects really make my life hard? I mean, not really. And I'm not perfect either. I have weed whacked Shane's planted tree seedlings before, probably because I was thinking about all these unfinished fences around the house, and I'm weeding. I like totally knocked him down, and I have dusted his black truck with white spray paint before, and I'm sure he wanted to wring my neck, but he has not ever brought that back up, actually. And you know, as I spent like a year or more working on this, just like trying not to think about those things, trying not to say anything. And after a year or so, Shane just on his own decided to start finishing projects around the house and decided, you know, I think Rayanne might like to have shelves in her kitchen after 6 years of no shelves. And he built them, and he gave me permission to say all this. I was not nagging him, and it allowed him to come to a place where he felt like he wanted to do those things for me. So it was a win-win. Another important thing in marriage is companionship. Like, do you enjoy doing things together? I would encourage you to make a list of things that you would want to do with your spouse and encourage them to make a list too, and then compare notes and pick a few to do together. Shane and I do more together than not. For us, it's not just fun activities like hiking and sports and eating out, but we also do projects together. We go to Home Depot. We volunteer together and just do more. I watch animated movies with him, and he watches action with me. And he takes me out for coffee, and I make him apple pie. So we do things for each other with each other. And it's not that we can't do things separately, but we just choose to do more together. Physical touch is something that I think is important too, and I mean non-sexual touch. This does not come as easy for me because I am just not a physical touch person. I was not as a baby. My mom said I was not cuddly. I didn't love everybody holding me. But I've just found that like long hugs and like hand holding, a hand on the shoulder as you walk by, it just keeps me feeling connection with Shane and just like in tune with him. And I think it's really important. I don't know if any of you guys watched the Olympics this summer, but I watched a lot of volleyball. And in the beach volleyball, I noticed that the girls would like hold hands every time they'd switch sides or like go to the sidelines for their timeout. And I thought that was really interesting. The last thing I'd want to do if I was sweaty and sandy was be like touching people. But I was like, that's really interesting. And I found out that the coaches were encouraging them to do that because it helped create a connection and it made them feel more like a team. So physical touch really does make a difference. And I know we're doing really well in this area when our girls like make gagging noises and are like, oh, get a room. So that being said, you should have sex. The more often you come together, the less distant you will feel. Sex was created by God for marriage between man and a woman, and it's a beautiful act in that space. It's a physical oneness, and it's important to be a willing participant. And I think it's especially meaningful if we wives are the initiators. And going with companionship and friendship, our spouses should be at the top of the list of our friendships, but having outside friendship is also important in a healthy marriage. These friendships should be made with care and intentional thought. I think it's important for Shane to get guy time, and it's good for me to spend time with my friends as well. And we do encourage each other in this, but we also do our best not to overdo time with other friends and time that will take away from each other and our kids. So that's just another area that's important to communicate about. And while we each have individual friends, it's been really good for us to have couple friends. The ones we have become the closest to are the people who challenge us to be our best selves, encourage us to follow God's plan, and who speak truth in love. And knowing we're doing life with others who have similar goals and are open to real life conversations has been impactful in a really good way for us. We're able to trust each other's friends when they're our friends together. Now, this is something that might seem kind of trivial, but I personally think it's really important, is taking care to be attractive for your spouse. It's easy to dress for being a mom and getting dirty, and there's nothing wrong with workout clothes and sweats and gardening clothes and stuff, but I do try to be aware of my appearance when Shane comes home at the end of the day. Even when the girls were little, I would try to be dressed in real clothes a couple days a week and like make sure my hair wasn't just thrown up in a bun. And it's not that he wouldn't find me attractive in those things, but when he sees me put effort into it, I'm telling him that I care about what he thinks and that he matters too. So that's just a thought. You can take it or leave it. And all this is just from my own perspective of marriage and our little story. And I just want to encourage you guys to pray over your spouse and your marriage. I don't want any of you guys to leave here feeling hopeless, because you're not. Please talk to someone. If you do feel like your marriage is beyond this, seek help and input. And while I believe choices that we make, little choices, practical changes can make a difference, I do know that marriages of success take two people, and it's not a guarantee that your spouse will make positive changes as well. I can just only say we are responsible for our own actions regardless, and there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. Every marriage is a target of the enemy, and I would just encourage you to follow God's word and direction in your life. I love you guys, and I really want y'all to have a joy-filled marriage, so thanks for coming.
So I'm focusing on a lot of the practical things for this breakout session. So I'm going to just briefly explain 3 premises that I'm working from, and then 4 principles that I'm working from that I could spend the whole talk on. But since I want to just talk about practical stuff, I'm just going to mention them. The first premise, which might go without saying, but I think it's really important, is actually I'm working from the premise that 2 Peter talks about, the Apostle Peter writes about in his second letter. And that's that we actually have been given divine power through the Holy Spirit to lead a godly life. So we have been empowered, and that we're supposed to partner with Holy Spirit in order to lead godly lives. So we're not in this alone. We actually have divine power to be culture makers in our homes. And that's my second premise, is that we have been given the responsibility to be the culture maker in our homes, and we've been given the power through the Holy Spirit to be that culture maker. So it feels a little dramatic, but you're not just managing screens, you're actually setting the culture of your family and your household with these boundaries and things that you put in place. It's actually a really important thing to have in your household. And when you feel overwhelmed, because we're always going to I feel like technology is just going to become more and more and more a part of our daily life, not only just in our culture, but also as our kids get older and they start having their own. It'll feel overwhelming at times, but we have to remember that there have been lots and lots of cultural challenges that other moms have faced that are maybe a little different, but that they have overcome and are able to still help their families be God-focused. So that's my second premise. Like I said, I'm going to be really, really practical, and pretty much everything I'm going to say comes from this book, The Tech-Wise Family. If you haven't read this book, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I have copies in the back if you want. I'm asking $5 for them just because I want you to really want it. But if you don't have $5, you can just take a book. This book is really, really helpful. And so if you end up reading it and then you're like, that sounds like something Carrie said, it's because I got it from this book, okay? So everything I'm going to say comes from this book, pretty much. My last premise that I'm speaking from is that our devices should really serve as tools to enhance our ability to fulfill God's call on our life. And so Andy Crouch in this book talks about how technology needs to be put in its proper place. And I feel like that's been really a helpful concept for me in thinking about tech, because it is really helpful. It is a tool. It's almost impossible to not have a smartphone and go about daily life. We were just talking about doctor's visits. Like, you kind of need access to your email and internet at all times. But it has a proper place. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And then I'm also speaking from 4 principles. So again, from the book, technology should support our relationships and not replace them. Our devices should help us create and not just be consumed. Family time should be protected and prioritized, and that rest and Sabbath are essential for spiritual health. And the reason for the rest and Sabbath in there is that our devices are kind of designed for us to be very self-focused, that everything we want our device, we change the settings on the device, everything we do on our devices get smarter with how we want them to run, right? So we are the center of this little life, if you call our device a life, you know what I mean. But rest and Sabbath are ways that we remember that it's actually not all about us, and it's actually all about the Lord. And so getting back into a habit of putting our phones away for a day and remembering who we really need to be focused on, that it's not all about us, is a really helpful discipline and habit to have. And so that's why that principle is there. So my whole talk is kind of based off these principles and premises, but I'm going to focus on very practical things. Again, Andy Crouch does a really good job of explaining all of those principles and premises really well. And so we're going to explore specific ways to establish healthy boundaries when we are parenting young and growing kids. The first one is sacred space for families. And so as you think about your home, what are some ways you can implement a sacred space that is tech-free? Whether it's maybe a dining area where you don't have any devices, no TVs, no phones are allowed there, or even a bedroom, if you say in your kids' bedrooms, device-free. If they're going to watch something on a device, like on an iPad or something, they come out to the living room and watch it. Something like that, creating a sacred space for them where it's technology-free. Dinner table in the bedrooms are kind of a great, easy way to start. Everyone's house is a little bit different. Some of us have big rooms where everything is in one kind of room, which makes it a little more difficult to have separate spaces. But for us, like, our dining nook is kind of outside of the main room. I mean, it's connected, but it's like a little bit removed. And so that's where we have dinner, and there's no devices are allowed at that table when we have dinner. So easy things like that. We also have been doing this where we have a charging station that's outside of our area where we mainly are. That way we can tell our kids. So I have a 14-year-old who has her own phone, and I have a 12-year-old son who has a watch phone. And then I have 10-year-olds, and they don't have phones. Keith and Ellie know that their phones live where this charging station is. Like, that's how we talk about it, is that's where they live. They don't live in the bedrooms. So at night, we plug our phones in there. I'm actually using a drawer now, so it's not hooked up to power yet, but that's the plan, is to hook the drawer up to power so you can plug in your phone at night and close the drawer. We put our phones to bed at night. That way, they're out of sight, hopefully out of mind, and not just on the table, because if you've noticed, if you have your phone like around, they have like some sort of power. You just like know that they're there, and you're just constantly kind of checking, or at least, I mean, that's just me. So having them in a drawer has been really helpful, just to set it aside. And then I do have a watch, I have a Fitbit, so I changed the settings on my Fitbit, so it's only gonna buzz when I get a text message, not when I get an email, because we get a million marketing emails. So you can monitor the things that you're aware of when your device is stowed, is really helpful, so that the sacred space that I'm trying to have in my house, it's easier to have because my phone isn't just right there out for all of us to see. So I talked a little bit about how my kids, they put their devices away at night. We also have settings on their devices, which I'll talk about a little bit later, how you can have settings on your kids' devices where they turn off, or more like they limit access after a certain time and not before a certain time. So the phone limits access at 9 o'clock for my teenager, and then she's not allowed to pick it up until 8 or 6:30 in the morning, which is like almost when she needs to leave the house. It's really early, but she's up earlier before that. So she doesn't have her phone in her room. She's not checking her phone late at night because she puts her phone to bed at night, which has been really helpful to just right as soon as she got the phone. That's how we set it up, and I'm really thankful that someone told me that, because there's even a stat in here that talks about how a certain number of teenagers will sleep with their phones next to them. And I think a lot of us sleep with our phones next to us. And I don't actually want that. I don't want that for me, and I don't want that for my kids. And so we put our phones in this space at night where they live. And then unless my husband's out of town or my kids are sleeping over at a friend's house, then I'll move my phone into my room because I want to be aware if they need me. Okay, so sacred spaces. You can designate different spaces in your homes. It's just you and your kids, and not devices don't go in there. Don't bring your device into your kids' rooms when it's bedtime. It's like you don't need to have your phone with you when you're reading a story unless you're reading it from your phone. But maybe pick a hardback. That's just an easy thing, I think, to implement in your routine. So sacred space, and then sacred time. So if there are times in your schedule where in the afternoon, if you pick your kids up at 3 and then it's kind of crazy and chaotic, you can, until like dinner time, you can make that a screen-free time for just you to interact with your kids, because there's going to be, I feel like at 3 o'clock is when I really have to bring it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? When I'm ready to take a nap, I pick my kids up and I'm like, it's go time, because there's like constant, like, sign this, do this, tell me about this, help me with my homework. It's a lot. And so if I'm trying to pay attention to my device, that like makes me really, really stressed out, and then I get really short with my kids. A sacred time could be family meals without screens. It could be device-free nursing or bottle feeding time. I know that's really challenging, because a lot of times that's when you can go to your device because you're just vegging out. But you can even set up for like one of your bottle feeding time or one of your nursing times is without your device. So just like be present in the moment. Like enjoy. You're not always going to have a little baby that you're bottle feeding, right? So try to enter in and be present. It could be a good challenge for you. How about the first hour after waking, or the last hour of your day before you go to bed? Put your phone away. Don't look at your phone when you first wake up. Those are some habits that I think are healthy for us to be in. And then there are times when we kind of get out of the habits. We have to course correct a little bit, right? Also, sacred time could be no phones during playground visits when you're with your kids at the playground with other kids, or even if you're just there with your kids. Be aware of what's around you. Think about like how maybe there's another mom at the park that you maybe should go talk to and introduce yourself to. Sometimes when I would go to the park, I don't go to the park that much anymore. But when I would, I just wanted to veg. I'm an introvert, and so a lot of the park was like, they can play, and I can so I don't want to talk to any moms. I just want to like be here. But also, it's a good time to kind of fresh your mind, even if you're not actively searching out other people to say hi to, just to kind of revisit with the Lord, check in. How are you doing? So that's just an idea. And then the third practical implementation is family accountability, right? So with your spouse, but also I feel like the most accountable accountability partners that I can have are my own kids. And just to tell them, hey, I'm trying not to be on my phone too much when we're hanging out. Can you tell me? And like even a 3-year-old will be able to tell you, like, Mommy, you're on your phone. So that's really helpful, it might be a little too helpful, right? Because a lot of times, we talked about this in the last session, a lot of times we're using our phone for actually like we're looking at the calendar, or we're paying a bill online or something like that. We're not just checking in on social media. Yeah?
Just to that, something that my husband heard is to tell them what you're doing in that situation.
Yes, exactly. Just to say, oh, thank you for telling me. I'm actually just checking my calendar right now, but after I'm done, let's go do this other thing. It's really helpful, because your kids are the ones that they're actually looking at you and observing, and you don't want them to know you with this. Yeah. So that's a great accountability partner. Set device curfews on either your phone device or on your kids' devices, where they're only allowed a certain amount of screen time. The phone shuts down at a certain time. With my daughter, because we do have a screen time limit on her phone, there was a challenge that her English teacher gave her whole class to say, like, who of you can limit your screen time a little bit more this next month or something like that. And they took an average of all the days because they could look it up on their digital well-being thing. And she won because she was limited to 2 hours a day on her phone from like the parental controls, which I kind of thought was a lot. But it's not a lot, actually, and her peers are on their phones a lot more. So as your kids get older, I know not all of you have high schoolers, as they get older, these are really easy things to implement because you can control them on the parent controls as long as your kids don't have your passwords. But that way it like helps them have established those boundaries, and then you can establish those boundaries for yourself too. It's really hard to like tell your kids one thing and you do something else, right? They know the duplicity when they see that. So all of these things we have to implement also and limit our own screen time, limit our own social media time, so that it's like when you're driving, as your kids and my kids have gotten closer and closer to driving age, I'm like more aware of my poor driving habits because they're watching me and they're like aware, like she's 14 and sitting in the front seat, like she can look and see how fast I'm driving. She's going to be driving in a couple years, so how does that change what I do? So it has to be a check in me. And of course, I tell her like, well, I didn't fully stop there because I've been driving a lot longer. But when you're 16, you have to stop fully. Like they're smart. They're going to be like, Mom, you're such a duplicitous person. Okay, so the same goes for our phones. We have to have these habits too. And that actually is my third point, family accountability, that we all kind of share this responsibility that we have to have a technology agreement with our kids that also applies to us. When we gave our daughter her phone, we did have a contract with her, a cell phone contract, where she knows what is expected of her and she knows the consequence when she breaks that contract. So that's been really helpful, so we don't have to be like on the fly, think of a quick consequence for something if she like uses something she's not supposed to or uses too much screen time or whatever. It's in the contract, and that's really helpful just to be really clear at the beginning. Let's see, we can use do not disturb settings when you are supposed to be really focused with your kid, or set up, you can set up do not disturb, you can set up work mode, those kinds of things. Use those tools that you have for your advantage. And then use old school alternatives. Like I've been trying to use a notepad and paper for my grocery list. So when I'm in the kitchen and I'm like, oh, we're out of cinnamon, I can write it on the list instead of using my phone to use my grocery list, because then I get sucked in to other things that are on my phone, other alerts that I might have missed. So it's just helpful to just going back old school, And then some positive alternatives for young kids. I feel like this is you kind of all know this, but it's just that idea of having something for your kid to do that is an alternative to screens. So I used to have like a busy book when we would go to the doctor's offices that they only got when we were waiting in a doctor's office, and they liked it. It was just, a little busy book with little clips and stuff. That kind of thing, that same concept, but like in your own home. So if you work, but your kids are home and you're trying to do work stuff, have like a box of Legos that they don't always get to use. So everyone's like kind of rhythms and household needs are different, but that's just one idea that can be really helpful. Using audiobooks too. My kids love audiobooks. They are really into Harry Potter audiobooks right now. So it feels like wherever I go, I can hear Jim Dale in the background. But it's like a really good way for them to be entertained without having to watch a screen. And then just be really proactive. Like you are setting your family's culture, so be proactive in how you think about it. Be prepared for those moments when you know you're going to need some extra help, instead of just throwing on a movie for your kids, which I know we all do. But maybe there's some other options you can have kind of in your back pocket to use instead of doing that every single time. So the Hang 10 movement, I just wanted to mention that this is written by Justin Early, who wrote the Habits of the Household book that we used a couple years ago for Mom to Mom. And it's just a contract for different things when you are giving your kid their own device. So I know not all of us have kids that have their own devices, but it's kind of a lot of the same things, waiting until 10th grade for a phone or social media. We waited until 9th grade, but then my daughter probably won't still be on social media in 10th grade. Like that feels like not something that I want her to be on yet. So, you can kind of tweak it for how you need. No phones in schools. Like sometimes my daughter has teachers that use a phone for Google Classroom and things like that they actually need. So that's kind of, take it with a grain of salt. Encourage important conversations face to face. A lot of these kind of same things. But it's just a cool kind of thing to think through as your kids get a little bit older. So you can grab one on your way out. Some more practical tips for implementation. Remember, it's a process, right? All of these things. And so start small. Think of something that would be really easy for you to implement now. Also, assess your technology use honestly. Don't be like trying to deceive yourself with how addicted you really are to your phone. Admit it to yourself, and then you can kind of take steps that you feel like the Lord is leading you to take in order to have kind of a healthy relationship with technology. Find accountability partners with other moms. Like if you're going to go to a park with another mom and you don't want to be on your phone, you can tell them, hey, I'm trying not to be on my phone while we're here at the park. Can you help me? Like, do you want to do this together? That kind of thing. Create emergency plans for hard days that you don't default into screens. So that's what we talked about, having another plan just in case you something comes up. Instead of just throwing on a movie, have a box of new toys they can play with. Again, it'll just depend on the age of your kids. And then celebrate progress as a family. If you feel like you have really cut back on your kids' screen time, like celebrate. Maybe have a movie night. I don't know, do something. It's celebratory for you and your family and your kids so that they have some incentive too. Address your setbacks with grace, because we will all fail. I don't know if anyone else, like I was totally drawn into Instagram yesterday with all of the fires going on. I feel like it's one of the more documented kind of tragedies in modern times. And so I was just constantly looking at these crazy videos of all these fires, and I was just like, okay, there's nothing I can do about this. I need to just set this aside and focus on my family in the here and now. So that was one thing I felt like was a setback, and I was laughing that, of course, it was like, I'm giving a talk on tech. And then this morning I went to pull up my phone because I was going to check something. But right when I got up, I'm like, okay, no. I'm going to talk about how we don't do that for the first hour of the day. So addressing your setbacks with grace, and then course correcting with whatever you have set up. Maybe you create like a rule of life where you have certain technology kind of guidelines for yourself and your kids, and then course correct as you need to. And then keep the focus on relationship building. So some other ideas: start with the most challenging time of day. Maybe it's the witching hour before dinner. Sometimes I would have my kids have their screen time right before dinner, so that way I could make dinner for them without them like throwing a tantrum. There's some pros and cons to that because then I feel like after that hour was done, they needed time to kind of be a normal person again. They were just really like grouchy, and then sitting down to dinner with everyone just it feels like a lot sometimes. So we kind of go in and out of that habit, but it could be really helpful, especially if you have little ones. You can create a visual schedule for little kids to reduce screen dependency. Connect with other moms and keep inviting, play spaces for your kids that encourage independent play. So I just wanted to reiterate your role in shaping your children's relationship with tech does start when they're young. They're watching how we interact with our devices, and so we want to set that culture for our homes. It's not about feeling, always watched or feeling guilty about it, but it is about stewarding a responsibility that we have. And also lean into the Holy Spirit. Like, we have the power of God living inside of us. Like, he knows how we need to navigate this, and he's going to be showing us and guiding us. And maybe you have a kid that is different from your other kid, and you need to do something a little differently than you did with your first or whatever. The Holy Spirit will be your guide. He knows you, and he knows your kids more than any person talking on tech does, more than any Andy Crouch. Like, Andy Crouch doesn't know your kids. So lean into the Holy Spirit, and he will actually give you the help that you need. Sometimes we forget that we actually have the power of the risen Christ within us. He can guide us. Okay? That's it. Yay. I think I got through all my stuff. And it's 10:28. So perfect timing. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
How do you handle exceptions so they don't take advantage of that in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably with different ages, it'll be different. I mean, I think as they get older, I feel like they are able to understand when you explain. But just like with discipline, once you kind of slack off a little bit and then you have to kind of course correct, there's a learning curve to get back to it. I feel like it's the same thing, and I don't know that there's like an easy thing to do. It's just more of like you have to be really intentional to stick with it and not let that like exception become the norm. I feel like that happens to me all the time. The exception becomes the norm, and then I have to regroup and say, okay, you guys, actually, and we just sit down with our kids and explain. I don't know, how old are your kids?
4 and 2.
Yeah, so they're super little.
Super little.
Yeah. I mean, your 4-year-old probably would be able to understand. Like, Mommy let you do this one time, but actually it's not what we normally do. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I kind of like, my kids are at grandma and grandpa's a lot.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They have the TV on nonstop,
Yeah.
even if no one's paying attention to it. And so it's like, how do you control limits when it's like you're at grandma's house and you can't really control what happens at grandma's?
Totally. You have to kind of let it go, and like your kids know, like, this is what we do at grandma's, but at our house we do it this way.
Okay.
Same if you're like co-parenting. You might have different rules for your household, but your co-parent is doing different things. You have to like just tell your kids, this is the norm for our house, and kind of let go where they are. Or if they're at like daycare, sometimes daycares will have like different movie times, or even at school. My kids will have had a pizza party at school and they'll have watched a movie in the middle of the day, which, it's fine. I'm not like super aggro about it, but especially when they were younger and I was watching how many hours they were on the screen, like, well, that was like an hour of screen time that you already had today. So yeah.
Do with my 4 and 6-year-olds is before we do the exception, I'm like, do you think you're mature enough to understand that like this is a one-time thing? It's not every Tuesday we're gonna do this. It's not every, and he'll be like, yep. And so just slowing them down enough to realize, because they want it, and so just kind of having that conversation before we do the exception, then, the next Tuesday, because my kids also, they come from really hard places, so they like systems, and they like,
Routine.
And so they'll like latch onto that, like, well, every Tuesday we're gonna do this now, and so we'll have that conversation before, and so then the next Tuesday when they're like, well, last Tuesday, a lot of times they don't even do that anymore because we've had that conversation, but then I'm like, oh yeah, do you remember that conversation where were you mature enough to realize that's not every Tuesday, it's just that one day, and oh yeah, and then that way.
That's such a good idea to talk to them before, and then asking them to like be mature. They're like, yes, I am mature enough.
We use that word a lot.
Yeah, Jules.
Yes, I'm mature enough. Okay, we can do it.
Yeah.
It's more like a comment, not like a question
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But this is my intention this year is to stop scrolling personally
Uh-huh.
myself. And the way I do that is by teaching him, like, I actually started with teaching him piano lessons myself, like what I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started noticing like other parents were bringing kids to piano lessons. One of the parents actually are here. So it's like I'm not trying to self-promote like my business or anything like that, but like
She is a good piano player.
but I'm telling you, like I'm creating like an online course that teaches parents to teach their own kids.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I literally cannot take a lot. I mean, like this, it's not a lot of that. And so I thought if they get off of social media and actually go to an app that's outside of Facebook or anything, and you live in this school community, like it's actually going to school online, and I'm showing parents how to like teach their kids this instrument, so they're getting off of it.
Yeah.
And
It's like
kids are getting
diverting their attention. You're giving them
but
something
I'm
else to
also
do.
Doing this to get off of it myself.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I have to sit there with my son, and I'm showing him like we're creating this course together, and it takes so much time to record and edit it. Like half the day is gone just doing one.
Yeah,
lesson.
yeah.
So it's helping us, like helping you. So if you want more information, like how to get on that school community, please contact me.
Yeah, cool.
The more people sign up, the more we're motivated to do this.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great.
Intentional. Like I'm addicted to scrolling, so I have to get out.
Yeah. Create something else. Yeah. Good call. Yeah, so if you guys want to grab these books, they're in the back. You can grab them as you head back. But what were you going to say?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
So my husband grew up playing video games. His dad grew up playing video games.
Yeah.
His dad gained when he was little. And so my husband's first tendency is to turn something on. I don't know
Yeah.
what you would recommend for that. I mean, he's 2, my son's 2, so it's not.
Yeah.
It's just hard because then he gets used to it when dad's home for Christmas or whatever, and then when dad's back at work, it's like this shock. I'm like,
Yeah,
TV.
like we don't actually do this.
You're not
Yeah.
gonna watch it every morning.
Yeah. Maybe you could do like a step down kind of process where it's like, with the first 3 days, you limit the amount of time, and then it kind of gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's like, okay, you have 5 minutes. We're going to do it for 5 minutes. I don't know. I'm not in that situation.
Right, yeah. I'm just trying to get on the same page.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, even coming up with a plan with him before he gets home and kind of even agree where you guys should be at with your kids, and how much screen time they should have. Maybe, you work it out with him, and try to come up with a plan. That one's tricky. For some reason, my husband didn't grow up playing a lot of video games, and so we haven't had that. We have a Nintendo Switch, but we don't play it. He doesn't play it on his own. It's just for the kids, so it's tricky. But and a lot of us we like movies, we like different things, and we have to. In my house, they hear everything down the hall. They hear everything we watch, so we can't watch stuff that we shouldn't watch, which is great. Yeah, exactly. Kids are the greatest accountability. Okay, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I Venmo you?
You can.